benefits using Teams for these presentations is that it does save the chat log where I can access that. So if you end up having some questions and you put those in the chat, please know that I will go back to those and I'll email you individually to address those. If I feel like it's something that everybody could benefit from, I may just answer all of them in one document and include that to send to Carolyn and her team to share with all of you guys. Okay, so let's talk a little bit again about benefits for eating to fuel our body. As I mentioned, we want to have increased energy, stamina, and speed, and improve performance, that injury prevention. We also want to make sure that we're eating well to complement our movement so that that's decreasing that recovery time that we have in between workouts. What does that recovery time look like for our muscles? Decreasing the loss of muscle tissue. We're going to talk a bit more about the different macronutrients in just a little bit. And so if we are under eating in certain macronutrients, that could contribute to us losing a bit of muscle tissue as we're working out, which isn't necessarily something that we want to do. And then also just overall improved health. So let's first start with carbohydrates. I think that carbs, depending on where you are getting your information, there's a lot of information about them. There's a lot of opinions about them, and they kind of go across the spectrum. Long story short, carbs are your body's preferred fuel source. Really, at the chemical level, our body, and specifically our brain, runs at its highest level of performance if it's actually getting glucose, aka carbohydrates. So our neurons, they really like carbohydrates. That's where they really thrive. Yes, our neurons and other cells can utilize energy from other macronutrients in an emergency situation. But really, when we're thinking about exercise performance or athletic performance, carbohydrates are really where it's at. And I think that if there are concerns about the types of carbohydrates that somebody is consuming, the great thing is we can get carbohydrate energy from more than one food group. So if I have a client that for medical reasons is needing to limit some of their starchy carbohydrates, then we can also make sure that they are getting adequate carbohydrate from fruit or dairy products. So Greek yogurt, or getting it from a banana. Oop, I think we have somebody that needs to mute themselves. Let me see if I can find you. Um,
I got it.
okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I was just like, wait a second. Okay. Dum, dum, dum. Okay. Let me go back, you guys. Okay. Hopefully you guys can still see my screen. And so for carbohydrates, the thing that I like for all of my clients to know, whether they are a seasoned athlete or somebody that is new to exercising, we're going to be talking about what we should eat prior to a workout and then what we should be eating after a workout, so that recovery nutrition. And the reason that quote unquote recovery nutrition is so important is that because we have carbohydrate stores within our body that really help energize us whenever we are in the middle of some type of activity. And so I don't know if you see that blue box that I have on the corner here. We have liver glycogen and muscle glycogen, and glycogen is just the fancy word for stored carbohydrates. So liver glycogen, that glucose that's stored in our liver, is really there as a maintenance store to help make sure that we maintain a stable blood glucose, a stable blood sugar during our movement and activity. And then we have our muscle glycogen, so that stored glucose in our muscles that supplies energy during our muscle contractions. And so after we do exercise, we want to replenish that back up again. We kind of want to be preppers. We want to make sure that we restore that. That's going to be really helpful. And so again, just when we're thinking about the benefits of carbohydrates, they are going to give our body energy during that workout. and we can get them from a variety of sources. And so you can see our different types of grains. We have our different dairy products. We have our fruits. And then I have my category of other. And just because they're listed here doesn't mean they're going to be the most nutrient beneficial or AKA healthy. But I am listing them there just because they are simply considered a source of carbohydrate. And now going on to protein, whoever the PR team is for protein these days, they are working overtime. They are doing a fabulous job. And I say that jokingly, but I also, I think that there has just been a lot more promotion of eating protein. And I don't think that that is a bad thing. I think the only way that that would be problematic is if that's the only macro that you eat and you're ignoring the others. But I think an increase in protein is not a bad thing at all. From an exercise perspective, protein is really going to be working overtime to help build and repair muscle tissues and other tissues. It can be used for energy when carbohydrates are not available. There are some additional metabolic processes that have to come into play for that to happen. But yes, our body could definitely do that. And now I will say that extra protein that's not needed for muscle building and repair can either be burned for energy or stored as fat. So it could be burned for energy if if we're eating within a certain calorie amount that our body needs. We don't have enough carbs available, so then the body's going to start breaking down that protein that we ate. It could be stored as fat if we're just overall eating in excess of all of our macronutrients. So if we're eating too much of anything, then of course, our body has the ability to be able to store that as fat. So I think it really just depends on what somebody's activity levels are and what that overall consumption is. And so when you're looking visually at your plate, you would consider having protein as about a third of your plate. And that can look different just depending on how much you're training. But I have some additional supplements that are going to help give you some visuals with that. There's also a lot of question too about how much protein is appropriate for someone. There is a lot of variability depending on what somebody's activity level is, what type of activities they're doing. And so, with the Sports and Human Performance Nutrition Dietetic Practice Group, for strength training individuals, there's a recommendation of anywhere between 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight for strength training individuals. If someone is more of an endurance athlete, primarily cardio, does a lot of running, and strength training isn't their focus, then that could be closer to 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. And then for someone who just does everyday regular activity, they have a walking routine, they're not necessarily going into this aggressive level of physical activity, then you've probably seen some recommendations in the past of anywhere between zero point 0.8 to 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. There's a lot of variation there. The one thing that I would say that you want to take into consideration with this is that if you do have routine checkups with your primary care provider, make them aware of what you're doing with your diet, especially if you are doing a significant increase or decrease in a specific macronutrient, including protein. Just because if there's a family health history related to chronic kidney disease or anything else where there could be a concern of putting stress on the body, specifically your kidneys, with that protein consumption. It can be really helpful for your healthcare team to know that. When we're thinking about the different types of protein sources that are available, typically people are thinking a lot about the various animal products that are out there. So meat and poultry, eggs, seafood, dairy. And when it comes to animal-based proteins, there is a lot to be said about animal-based proteins being thought to be being more bioavailable than plant-based proteins. That just means they're a little bit more easily absorbable. But for my vegan and vegetarian friends, you can certainly and clearly get adequate protein from your plant-based proteins. I think that as long as if you are a vegetarian or vegan, that you're maximizing all of the various vegetarian protein sources that are out there, that's the main thing. thing. I think it's a little bit more tricky when I'm working with a client who is vegan or vegetarian, but then they're also really picky and they don't like a lot of the plant-based proteins that are out there. So it makes it harder for us to get adequate protein for that individual, especially if they're an athlete. I had some issues a few years ago working with some of our wheelchair tennis athletes that were vegan, but they didn't like any sort of legumes. And so when we were thinking about some of the different plant-based proteins and them getting enough, it was a little bit tricky. So we just want to make sure that we're aware of that. Also, too, you probably see the quote that I have on the screen that says, more isn't always better. Sometimes more is just more. I say this because, we are at the time of the year where there are New Year's resolutions out there, and the wellness and fitness industry is $1 trillion industry worldwide. So on your social media or anywhere else, there's just going to be a lot of advertisements for products that make you feel like you have to have them. And so when we think about these different protein powders that have just a ton of grams of protein, like these mass gainers, sometimes more isn't always better. More is just more. And they use these really, really high protein values to be able to jack up the price and make you feel like you're getting a better bang for your buck if you go with this. But I just want you to take into consideration your body can only absorb so much. There is going to definitely be a finite level of protein that your body can tolerate. So just again, keep that in consideration whenever you see some of those different products that are on the market. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about dietary fat. So, dietary fat is going to be an important component of our diets, anywhere between 20 to 35% of our overall calories. We want to try to avoid high fat meals and foods, but this doesn't mean to avoid fat completely in our diet or our meal. I like to tell groups and clients that dietary fat within a meal or a snack is basically the component of that meal or snack that actually provides satiety to our cells. I don't know if you've ever eaten a meal or snack and you got full from it, but you weren't necessarily satisfied. And it could be a lack of dietary fat in that meal or snack. So while you're technically full, it wasn't necessarily satisfying. From a chemical and cellular level, we do need dietary fat for healthy cells, hormones, skin, and hair. We also need it to be able to absorb fat soluble vitamins, vitamins A, D, E, and K. And when we are thinking about the different types of fats that we're eating, focusing on unsaturated fats, you'll see the different types of dietary fats that may occur in our meals, whether that's the butter or margarine that we have, salad dressing, oil, the natural fats that we find in nuts, avocado, cream cheese, and things of that nature. Okay, so now I do want to transition into talking a little bit about what do we want our nutrition to look like before a workout? What is the purpose of this? And because I know that I'm talking to a wide variety of an audience when it comes to level of physical activity, I think this information is going to be really relevant whether you're just starting your exercise journey or you're a little bit more seasoned in what that movement looks like for you. And so I'm going to be talking about what that pre-exercise nutrition should look like. What should it look like during your workout? What should it look like after your workout? And then we're going to talk about what that looks like depending on the time of the day that you are going to work out. Because again, I think that there could be a lot of variability with our audience today. So, the big thing about our pre exercise or pre performance nutrition is really just to give us the best energy levels possible. We want it to be carbohydrate focused. One thing that I failed to mention with my carbohydrate slide is that because carbs are your body's preferred fuel source, they are chemically built to be broken down pretty quickly so that the body can instantaneously use that energy or glucose from that carbohydrate food in whatever activity you're about to do, whether you're fueling your brain to write a big report or you're fueling your body so that you can really kill it on that run. So, especially if you're doing a lot of cardio based activity, carbohydrates are going to be really, really important. Yes, we're going to include some protein in there. We're going to be careful about those amounts just so we don't overload our digestive system. Protein and fat take longer than carbohydrate to digest. So we just don't want to overload our digestive system and our blood flow going to our gut, trying to digest a high protein, high fat meal right before we're about to work out. So those are some things we need to consider. And as we first look at what does a pre-workout meal look like, and so you see I've highlighted the word meal, and so this is going to be a larger amount of food, so anywhere between 2 to 4 hours before an activity. We're going to talk in even more detail about this, about what this could look like, especially if you work out really, really early in the morning and this is not possible. But I would say the 2 to 4 hours is just a general recommendation. I want you to think about what your own preferences are with that in terms of the way that your body digests food. I've had clients who have had no problem eating a pretty decent sized meal 1 to 2 hours before a workout, but I have also had clients that they would rather have, like, a completely empty stomach, like, it needs to be a good 5 hours. I've been in both camps before. I don't know if it's a difference between being in my 40s now versus being in my 20s with what that preference is, but if you know for yourself, what is your kinda window when it comes to, like, your last significant meal before a workout, feel free to put that in the chat because I would be curious to see that. I didn't get to ask a specific question of Mentimeter about that, but if you want to put that in the chat, I would be curious to know what that looks like. But again, because this is a meal and we have a little bit more time for hopefully for our body to digest this before going into our workout, it's going to be high in complex carbohydrates. We do want to limit protein, fat, and fiber. Again, mostly because we just don't want to overload our digestive system where it's taking a really long time to digest that before we go into that activity a little bit later on. And that's not to say it can't have any fat at all, any protein at all, or any fiber at all, but we just don't want it to be so much that it's kind of messing with our digestive system. And so if the gears are turning for you where you're like, maybe I do need to change up how much protein I'm eating in my last meal before my workout because I am noticing maybe I'm not digesting as well as I would like to before going into that high intensity workout that I'm doing. Obviously, we don't want to overeat. And then we're also going to hydrate in this pre-workout meal as well. So some example pre-workout meals where we've got good amount of carbohydrates, some protein. This isn't a greasy meal. I put an example of like some grilled chicken breasts with some pasta salad and fruit. Maybe you're just doing a turkey sandwich that you made at home with, some veggies, maybe an individual Greek yogurt cup. That Greek yogurt cup, what I like about Greek yogurt is it has a higher protein content than regular yogurt. So you could do Greek yogurt, you could do regular yogurt. Maybe if this was more of a breakfast meal scenario, then it could be some oatmeal with banana and peanut butter. So again, a lot of variability there. Okay. And then let me look and see. I just want to double check in the chat what I have. Sorry, you guys. Okay, so pre-workout snack. So we were talking about a meal earlier. So that meal is going to be happening a little more far away from our actual workout. So for a pre-workout snack, this is going to be happening much closer to our workout time. So this is going to be anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour before an activity. So say, for example, you work out after work, you have your lunch around like 11:30, 12, but your workout's not till 5. So you need a little pick me up right before that 5 or 5:30 workout. So maybe this is where you end up having a pre-workout snack around like 4 o'clock or 4:30, whatever that time frame works out for you. So at this point, it is going to mostly be carbohydrates, just because we are so close to that activity window. If you like to count grams, yeah, general recommendation is around 30 grams. You could change that up depending on your preference. So think banana, granola bar. Maybe it's easier for you to drink your nutrition prior to a workout. So maybe this is a sports drink instead. So again, you can see some different examples here. So fruit, granola bar, crackers, or pretzels. Sorry, guys. Okay. Bum, bum, bum. And then during the workout, we are really going to be focusing on that hydration. So if you have the ability, anywhere between 4 to 8 ounces of water every 15 to 20 minutes throughout that activity. If you are doing something pretty strenuous, like you're doing some long distance running, especially doing something outdoors, then you may want to think about replenishing your carbohydrates and your electrolytes with a sports drink as needed. And then after the workout, so you've done your workout, and now we want to think about our recovery nutrition. And so, general rule of thumb that I typically tell my athletes and the general public is you do want to try to eat or drink something within an hour of that movement concluding, just to be able to put those glycogen stores, that backup glucose, back into your liver, back into your muscle, so that's ready to be used next time. Also, too, whenever we're doing any kind of physical movement, whether we're doing cardio or strength training, we get little micro tears in our muscles. And the way that those micro tears make us have better muscle endurance or have better muscle strength is through that repair process. And the way that those micro tears repair is through the recovery nutrition that we're eating. And that's going to include our protein and our carbohydrate. And so one thing that we don't want to do is we don't want to have a recovery meal that is too greasy or too high in fat, mostly because that dietary fat that's also in the meal can make it harder for the body to efficiently absorb and digest the carb and protein that need to be prioritized. So then that recovery doesn't take as much priority within that meal because your body is trying to deal with all of that fat that is in there. And that's not to say don't hit up some cookout after you've had a glorious workout, or maybe you really accomplished something and you want to do something celebratory and you're having whatever. That's totally fine. But if we're thinking about this for everyday recovery nutrition, you probably want to avoid something that is overly greasy. Also, too, during this recovery nutrition process, we want to make sure that we're replenishing our hydration, also replenishing those electrolytes. And that could be through a sports drink, that could be through making sure that there is some sodium that's present within our meal, along with us hydrating with regular water. So, some example post workout meals: if you work out really early in the morning and your recovery meal is your breakfast, this could be a Greek yogurt parfait with mixed berries and granola. Maybe this is grilled chicken with quinoa and veggies, a little quinoa bowl of sorts. Maybe it is something like salmon, rice, and a sweet potato, things of that nature. So again, we're going to be getting that great amount of protein, some great carbohydrate in there, nothing overly greasy. So why carbs and protein? Um, Marie Spano is a colleague of mine who lives in the Atlanta area. She is a board certified sports dietitian. She's actually the sports dietitian for the Atlanta Braves. And so, one of the analogies that she often uses with her athletes when it comes to thinking about carbs and protein and building lean body mass is thinking about it similar to building a house where carbs are your construction workers and protein is your raw material. So if I have an individual who is only focusing on protein all the time, they've decided to go on a really, really, really low carb diet, they're eating high in protein, and and they're just getting this from some different sources on the internet. It's like, oh, it sounds like I need to, really cut my carbs and, real only focus on protein. What that essentially does, it's like having all that protein and no carbs. It's like having a ton of raw material at the job site, but no construction workers, aka carbs, to do something with that, to be able to build that lean body mass. Same thing goes if I have an individual that's really only focusing on carbohydrates, but they're not eating enough protein. You've got all these great construction workers at the job site, but there's not enough raw material for them to work with. So I am not opposed to someone being more intentional with their carbohydrate intake, including reducing that if they feel like they had been eating too many carbohydrates previously. I just don't want that carbohydrate intake to be too low. And if you have questions about what is considered too low, it really depends on the individual. And I'm more than happy for you to email me after today's presentation so I can give you a little bit of guidance as to what that would look like for you for your particular situation. But pretty much, carbohydrates are essentially used as an energy catalyst for your body to use that protein productively for building that lean body mass. So just keep that in mind. Okay, we're going to start talking about hydration now. And I'm kind of curious, how much water do you drink daily? Okay, I see a lot of you guys responding. Hopefully, you guys can see these results in real time too. So it looks like a good bit of us drinking 64 to 100 ounces a day, which is fabulous. Thank you to my people who are acknowledging the Diet Coke. I joke about that, but I love me some Diet Coke myself, so I felt like I needed to add that in there. Um, and regardless of where you are, at this moment, this just helps provide some awareness about opportunities for what you can do with your eating and beverage habits as you're being physically active. So, we see some folks doing less than 64 ounces a day, so that less than that 8 glasses of water a day. Then we've got 64 to 100 ounces. There's a handful of us doing over 100 ounces. And then there's a couple of us that water may be non existent at this point, but that's totally okay. So, keeping that in mind and thinking about where you are when we start thinking about our physical activity, the reason that we want to make sure that we are staying adequately hydrated from an exercise and movement perspective is because it's really going to help our body regulate temperature and cool efficiently while avoiding unnecessary elevation in heart rate. So, if you are newer to exercise and then as you start to build that endurance, we really kind of measure how well we're doing cardiovascularly with what is our heart rate doing whenever we're increasing that intensity. And you may notice over time that you're actually able to tolerate a higher level of intensity and your heart rate isn't going as high because you've gotten used to that movement. But also, too, because now you're adequately hydrating yourself. So your body has that ability to do better temperature regulation, better heart rate regulation because of that adequate in hydration. Also, too, it's going to improve our ability to recover quickly from training and competition, minimizing muscle cramps. Oh my gosh, y'all, I hate calf cramps so bad, so terrible, especially in the middle of the night. And so, if we're staying adequately hydrated, that can be really helpful. Also, too, aside from exercise, if we're on point with our water intake, we actually have better mental clarity, better decision making, concentration, and motor control. So our neurons, that brain matter, really needs that intracellular, extracellular fluid to be adequate there in terms of hydration. And then also from an immune defense perspective too, where our immune system is really weakened when we haven't been drinking enough water. Also, too, you may not perform as well if your body is low on water. So if you're starting to run, train for the 5K, if you're not drinking enough water, that could be an issue if you're constantly dehydrated. And you don't want to wait until you're thirsty to start drinking water. Because by the time you're actually perceiving that thirst on your lips or your throat, you're already in an active state of dehydration. One of the body's initial signs of dehydration is that it can often mimic the feeling of hunger. So if you've just eaten a meal or you've just eaten a snack, and then about 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, maybe even 30 minutes later, you're feeling hungry again, I like to do something called the water test. And that would be drinking a glass or bottle of water, wait about 10 minutes, and then reassess that hunger feeling. If the hunger went away, it might have been more of a hydration issue. If you are still hungry, you may have truly not eaten enough at that meal or snack. So just think about that. And then also when you're gauging, making sure that you've drank enough water. Urine can be a really good indicator in terms of output as far as the color. So maybe shooting for clear to pale yellow. If you are on some type of vitamin supplement that makes your pee look like Mountain Dew, that at least you'll know that it's from that supplement. But if you're not taking anything at all and your pee does look like Mountain Dew, then that's probably a problem. And again, like I said, body's going to potentially mimic the feeling of hunger as an initial sign of dehydration. During the winter months, we're more prone to dehydration because we don't have that prompt of the hot weather outside to get us to think about drinking fluids. And so with the hard air, that hold cold hard air, that can dehydrate us. Also, in the summer, we're more likely to be eating and drinking water rich foods and beverages. So, salads, fresh fruits, things of that nature. In the winter, that may not necessarily be the case unless you're doing a lot of soups and you're getting a lot of fluids that way. So, just being really intentional with that fluid intake during the winter months is going to be helpful too. And you really just want to be proactive with your hydration as much as possible. The last thing you want to do is decide that you're going to go for a run or do some type of really strenuous physical activity and realize you've been dehydrated all week. And then you drink a ton of water right before that activity or that movement or that workout class because you're stressed out about having to go pee. You've got a lot of water within your digestive system that hasn't worked its way through. So just being proactive throughout the week with that hydration can make it where you're not having to do an emergency gulp of your Stanley Cup right before a workout. I've done that before at the rec center and even before an Orange Theory class. And then I'm hopping off the treadmill every 5 minutes because I'm like, dang, I did not set myself up for success. And then signs and symptoms of dehydration. I'm not going to go into too much detail with this. This is more so here so that you can refer back to it in your notes. But again, trouble tolerating heat, muscle cramps, headaches, nausea and vomiting, heart rate elevated above normal response. So, a lot of things that we can perceive if we're not adequately hydrating for our exercise. Okay. And now let's talk a little bit of caffeine. We were mentioning hydration earlier. Tell me, where does your caffeine come from? Okay, so a lot of coffee drinkers here. I see some folks that they like caffeine in any form. We've got some tea drinkers. We have some folks that caffeine is not part of their normal MO. And that is great too. So I think but I would say it's safe to say a lot of us are coffee drinkers in this group today. So when it comes to caffeine, and physical performance with exercise, I did want to just include a couple of notes here in case you are interested. So, caffeine can be helpful when it comes to focus and mental alertness. It can also have some effects on our athletic performance. So, if you have started drinking an energy drink before going to a specific workout class, maybe doing some strength training, what are some different ways that caffeine can affect our body? So, when we're thinking about how caffeine affects athletic performance, when we look at the data and the research out there, there are small to moderate benefits when it comes to jumping, throwing, sprinting, even muscular strength and endurance. So if you notice yourself being able to do more reps of certain sets of movements, or maybe choosing a heavier weight between caffeinating yourself and not caffeinating yourself, there's some different dosages that are there, and I've included that information here as well, especially if anybody is dabbling in some pre-workout supplements. One of the supplemental handouts that I'm including, because I won't be able to go over it today, is related to creatine. I get a lot of questions about that when it comes to exercise, as well as a lot of people now using it for perimenopausal symptoms. So just be sure to look at that when that gets sent to you. And then, when should you use consume caffeine? You can see that towards the bottom of my slide. It says when you need a little pick me up, you haven't had a good night's sleep, when you're thinking about timing it for your physical activity, probably starting that dosage of caffeine from that beverage anywhere between 45 to 60 minutes before you want it to peak in your bloodstream. And then also, some potential adverse effects may include nervousness, interference with sleep. So if you do work out a little bit later in the afternoon, or just in the afternoon or evening in general, you may decide not to caffeinate for that workout, especially if that could affect your sleep hygiene and your ability to go to sleep at an appropriate hour. So think about that. Also, if you do have excessive caffeine intake, and I'm talking over 400 milligrams a day, then that can contribute to a diuretic and a laxative effect. And that's why you're probably going to see a lot of caffeine in some weight loss supplements on the market, because most people think, oh, that caffeine is in that weight loss supplement so that I have better energy levels, so that I can go really crazy on the elliptical. And while that can be the case, you're also probably going to be seeing changes on this scale because you're constantly peeing and pooping from that caffeine, because of the laxative effect and the diuretic effect. So just keep that in mind overall. And also, too, if you have too much caffeine, then it's going to make it harder for you to concentrate. You're going to have higher irritability levels, but a lot of it is an individual tolerance situation. So you may know what your body tolerates best. So, again, just keep that in mind. And then I would recommend not having more than 200 milligrams of caffeine in one sitting. So, even if somebody is recommending to you personally, like, hey, I think for you and what I know about your anthropometrics and everything else, you probably shouldn't go over 400 or 500 milligrams of caffeine per day. You don't want to take all of those milligrams all at once. I would not recommend having more than 200 milligrams within one sitting, or within one beverage. So, being aware of how much caffeine is in specific beverages can be helpful. I think with some of the energy drinks on campus in the vending machines, I think we have it's Rain is the brand. I Maybe it might have been another brand that I saw, but there's typically around 300 milligrams of caffeine in those. I think for Alani and Celsius, it's around 200 milligrams. A really strong cup of coffee, and depending on how much coffee you're drinking, there's a lot of variability there. So anywhere between 50 to 100 milligrams per cup. So just being aware of that caffeine content can be really important. Okay, so let's take a look now at timing of pre and post workout nutrition, depending on what time of the day that you are working out. So, as you can see, if you are doing an early morning workout, um, that pre-workout, maybe something that's really, really small. I don't know how many of you prefer to work out on an empty stomach. I know I prefer that when I can, especially if I'm working out really early in the morning, like 5 in the morning. So maybe that's something like a banana, a small sports drink, Greek yogurt cup. But also, too, hold on one second, guys. My 5-year-old is screaming there's an emergency. I will turn off my camera and mic really quick. Give me like 2 seconds.
I dropped the creatine fact sheet in the chat for anyone who's interested in that. She mentioned a couple slides ago.
Okay, sorry, you guys. Apparently, my 5-year-old's um, emergency was something related to a superhero cape and not them throwing up. So I got to jump back on here faster than I thought I would. Okay, so with your early morning workout, if you work out at like 5 in the morning, whatever the case may be, clearly and if you need a little bit of time for even a snack to digest, who wants to wake up at 3:30 in the morning just for the sake of getting in a snack so that they're energized for their 5 a.m. workout, right? I know I don't. So, the scenario that I would probably perceive for most folks is you're probably going to want to be intentional with what your meal is the night before. So, the night before you go to bed, whether you're having a bedtime snack or your dinner meal, make sure there's actually some carbohydrates in there just so that your body can be locked and loaded when it comes to that liver and that muscle glycogen to fuel your workout during that early morning. And that's going to make that post workout nutrition even more important when it comes to having some protein and carbohydrate there. So that could be a smoothie, overnight oats, maybe an egg sandwich, cereal and milk with a boiled egg. I put some recommendations there of what would be considered adequate carbohydrate in terms of at least some minimums that you want to be hitting with that recovery nutrition as well as that protein. Okay. And then if you are a midday lunchtime workout kind of person, maybe you like to go for that walk around the quad. Maybe you're hitting up a group exercise class at the rec center or doing something else. Maybe you drive off campus to go work out somewhere. So that pre-workout nutrition, it could be a mid-morning snack, depending on the gap of time between breakfast and your workout, or it could be your breakfast, your desk fist. I think that there's just a lot of variability with my clients when it comes to what time they eat breakfast. Are they eating breakfast before they head to the office? Do they eat their breakfast at work? What does that look like? And then what time that midday workout class is. So, I have some examples there. And then post-workout nutrition, depending on the timing of when you finish that up and when you're actually taking your lunch, it could be your actual lunch meal at the conclusion of the workout. So that could be a deli sandwich with a side of fruit. Maybe it's your favorite protein shake. There's so many different ones on the market. I love the convenience of a protein shake. They tend to be on the lower side with carbohydrate, which is understandable. So my recommendation would be supplementing some carbohydrate in there. It doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to be anything overly starchy. It could be a banana, cup of berries, things, something like that. But just get some carbohydrate because I feel like a lot of the protein shakes on the market, it's like 5 or 6 grams of carbohydrate, which isn't terrible, but I feel like you need just a little bit more. Or it could be a smoothie that includes both carbs and protein. So maybe something that you make in the office and frozen blueberries, Greek yogurt, little scoop of protein powder. And then if you are a late afternoon or early evening workout person, so you're working out right after work if you get off at 5. So that pre-workout nutrition, again, depending on how long ago your lunch was eaten, could be an afternoon snack that you have in the office before you're heading to the workout. So maybe your favorite protein or granola bar or apple with a cheese wedge. That post-workout nutrition could be your dinner meal that is immediately following your workout, depending on what time you normally eat dinner. I know for me, sometimes when there is a little bit of a length of time between when I'm going to have my next meal and when I've just finished my workout, I'll make sure that I immediately have something in my car that I can have for some recovery nutrition as I'm pulling out from the gym. So that could be that protein shake or some type of protein bar. I know there was some questions in the chat about what kind of granola bars I recommend. I actually have a full list that I will send y'all. I didn't get to include it in the supplemental handouts that I provided to Carolyn, but Carolyn, if I can send that to you after the fact to share with everybody, I would love to do that because I have some recommendations for for protein bars and granola bars, and things that you want to look for on the nutrition facts label. Because honestly, y'all, sometimes I'm just shopping based on what's a BOGO deal at Publix or Target or Aldi or anywhere else. And it's just a matter of, does it fit certain parameters of what I'm looking for nutritionally, and if it's the right price point for me that particular week. So I'll send that over. Okay, so really quickly, I'm not going to go over the juicing and smoothie slide. There's a couple other things that I want to prioritize in our last bit together, but this is just kind of giving my thoughts on, where, you know, do we use juicing for a meal replacement? Short answer is no, but a smoothie, yes, because you can get a lot more nutrition in there. And while we may have good intentions with going on some type of juice fasting diet or whatever else, we just want to be really careful with that when it comes to rebound hunger. So I have some thoughts there. And then hangry free salads. A big thing that I usually emphasize to groups. This is something that I've specifically utilized with our Crimsonettes, our color guard, and our dance team. We have a lot of good intentions when we're building a salad in terms of getting those fresh veggies, those non-starchy veggies, all of that produce in there. But when it comes to non-starchy veggies, unless they're breaded and deep fried, they're pretty much just water, fiber, vitamins, and minerals, which can give us a false sense of fullness as we're eating them. But as our body digests it, it's like, oh my gosh, where's my energy? Where's my macros? Like I need a little bit of something, something. So this is really just your checklist for making sure that you've got a source of carbohydrate within that salad, making sure there's some type of source of protein in there, making sure you have some form of dietary fat on that salad. Doesn't necessarily have to be salad dressing, but make sure there's some form of dietary fat in there just so it is more of a complete meal. Because I think that sometimes our good intentions of not having those things and only focusing on the veggies can make us overly hungry. And then we go into some rebound eating and maybe eating in a way we don't want to a little bit later because our body's like, where's my carbs? Where's my protein? Okay, so some other last nutrition tips. Um, it's been several years now since we have transitioned from the old label to the new nutrition facts label. That was under previous First Lady Michelle Obama, whenever those changes were made. But with the old label and the new label, in the carbohydrate section in particular, so quote unquote, back in the day, when it came to the total carbohydrates for the old label, you would see sugars listed. And then you see on the new label, under total sugars, it includes what is added sugars. So on the old label, they didn't always indicate where that sugar was coming from. It just was listed as sugars. And so I would have a lot of clients that didn't want to eat things like yogurt or this or that because it's like, oh, it has too much sugar. And I'm like, well, let's look at the ingredients. So just FYI, ingredients for a food are listed in descending order by weight. So, whatever is making up the first two or three ingredients of that food is what that food has the most of. So, if I am looking at a thing of yogurt and like the first three ingredients, it's like non fat milk, frozen strawberries, da da da, then I'll know those are coming from natural sugars. But if one of the first ingredients, especially with a lot of like kids products like kid yogurts, you'll see high fructose corn syrup or something along those lines within the first couple of ingredients, and that means they've added a lot of sugars. Thankfully, with the new label, though, it delineates what is considered an added sugar versus a natural sugar. So just wanted that to be mentioned just as an FYI. And then also, what is your pace of eating? Are you a quick pace eater or a slow paced eater, or does it depend on your hunger level? Okay, very nice. Looks like a lot of us, it seems to depend on our hunger level. I can completely understand. I think for that, I feel like that's most applicable to me. My husband's definitely more quickly paced than I am, but then I have a lot of my colleagues that are slower paced. So the reason I ask this is, and if you've ever sat in a session with me before, you'll probably know that I talk about this a lot. You do want to take time with your meals. It typically takes about 15 to 20 minutes for brain and stomach to communicate and provide a sensation of fullness. A lot of times, though, we end up eating so fast that within the first 5 minutes of eating, you might have already eaten the physical volume of food that is appropriate for you to be full and to be satisfied with the nutrients that you need and all that good stuff. But because brain and stomach haven't had a chance to talk to each other yet, because you consume that within the first 5, 8 minutes, you may still be hungry, and then you keep nibbling and nibbling. And then it's not until about 30 minutes later that fullness finally hits you, and it's that overfull feeling or that Thanksgiving full. And so we really want to be intentional with being mindful with our meals, taking our time, allowing our body to process that fullness. So if you're not really sure how you compare to that 15 to 20-minute recommendation, I would say the next time you eat a meal where you're not having to be in a rush for logistical purposes, like a quick lunch break or whatever, but maybe at your dinner meal, time yourself to see where you compare to that 15 to 20-minute recommendation. If you're trying to think of tactics to slow down that pace of eating, doing something as simple as putting the fork down in between each bite. It sounds so silly, but you may be like me, where there's oftentimes I'll take a bite of pasta, and it's not even before I've finished chewing and swallowing that first bite that I already have that next bite of pasta loaded and ready to go, locked and loaded, less than an inch from my mouth. It's like, wait a second. So I think getting into that practice of taking a bite of food, setting your fork down, chew, swallow, make sure you take a sip of water or whatever beverage, then have that next bite. Same thing with a sandwich. It just creates some natural pauses there, and then also you can check in with yourself in between those bites when it comes to assessing your fullness and satisfaction level. So instead of using that visual cue of, oh, there's no more food in my Tupperware from the leftovers I brought yesterday, it's more of you learning to have those cues of, oh, I'm actually full now. I didn't need to finish everything in my Tupperware that I brought. Because I think, again, if we grew up as part of the Clean Plate Club, that's more of our prompt oftentimes. I kind of mentioned that with strategies for pacing our eating. And then also this hunger scale, very quickly, it goes from 0 to 10, with 0 being our hungry side and 10 being our full side. You really want to approach your eating and address your hunger levels when you feel like your hunger is at a 3. And what that's going to feel like for you is it's a gentle feeling of hunger. It is very polite. It's the kind of hunger that says, hey, I'm getting hungry. If you can give me something to eat in the next 30 minutes, that would be great. So it's gentle enough to let you use some nutrition knowledge and logic about what you want to eat, plan something, microwave whatever you got to do, or get to where you want to go to get the carbs and protein that you want. But it's not aggressive where you're making impulsive choices. And you can check in with yourself in that meal and stop when your eating is at a 7 or an 8. Unfortunately, though, we live in a society where we wait until we're hangry to eat, so closer to a 1 or 2. So instead of your body saying, hey, I need something to eat in 30 minutes, our body is saying, hey, I need something to eat in the next 30 to 40 seconds, or things are about to unload. Like, this is bad. I'm getting hangry. And this is where we can make impulsive choices at the vending machine. Maybe we go to the common space in our office and just kind of snack on whatever. All of a sudden, we're making an impulsive choice based on what is the shortest line at the student center, if our office is in the student center. So again, I think if anything, if we're more proactive with our hunger cues, that is a game changer when it comes to the quality of our food choices. And then this is kind of a scale for helping assess what that fullness potentially looks like for you that you can refer back to. But I just want to know, in our last minute together, what is one thing you'd like to modify when it comes to fueling for your exercise? It can be based on information from today, hopefully, or maybe just some personal revelations you've had, but please share as we wrap everything up.
Jeannie, you had a couple questions from the chat. If you have time to answer as appropriate.
Yes, absolutely. And then I'm gonna let me open
One,
up the
one
chat
was
right quick.
chocolate milk. What are your thoughts about chocolate milk post-workout?
Yes. Okay. So actually, chocolate milk is really great. If you talk to any certified board certified sports dietitian, they will tell you that chocolate milk is really phenomenal for recovery. When we're thinking about the phosphorus content in there, the and the other micronutrients, so those minerals that are in there, as well as the carb and protein, really fantastic choice. I don't know if that's because the chocolate milk industry has been in cahoots with the sports industry, but really from a science perspective, it is very helpful. So that is super appropriate. And I think a lot of people like the Fairlife that's out there, and again, the different chocolate milks on the market. If you can find one of the ones that have the least amount of added sugars, that's going to be the route that you want to take.
Also, like eating a salad 3 to 4 times a week, is that good for you or not?
Yes, totally appropriate. Yeah, you can have a salad as much as you want to, great source of fiber, micronutrients. Just make sure that you're adding some additional components on there so you do get that adequate carbohydrate and protein and fat. It can be easy to get that initial fullness from those non-starchy veggies. So making sure that we are intentionally adding some carbohydrate on there, whether we're having some fruit on the side, we have a sweet potato, maybe we're adding in some cooked pasta that we're mixing in with that salad, and it can mix in with that vinaigrette to flavor that pasta as a way to get that carbohydrate. Really great compliment too.
Right, there's one other one. What are your thoughts on student athletes taking creatine?
Um, so I don't necessarily have an issue with it. A lot of it is going to be a concern about the dosages. I think that sometimes there's some initial concern just based on age and actual need. But when it comes to enhancing athletic performance and muscle recovery, there are camps of dietitians, especially that work with younger athletes and college athletes, that feel very comfortable with college students utilizing creatine.
Two more. So, could the chocolate milk work for pre-workout? And then, is there a brand that you recommend? Chocolate milk.
Yes, yes. Okay, so I really like the Fairlife brand, which admittedly, I haven't looked at all of the brands that are out there, but Fairlife, I really like that. I feel like they've been intentional with not having too many added sugars with their product, and it tends to be a little bit higher protein. Having that as a pre-workout could be appropriate depending on the individual. And I just say that because I have some clients that chocolate milk, they wanted to use it as a pre-workout, didn't fare well on their stomach, but for others, it's a non-factor. So it really could be dependent on what somebody's dairy tolerance is prior to a workout. But for it to be chocolate milk specifically, usually that's not an issue and could be a totally great pre-workout beverage.
So we had in there.
Well, good deal. Well, please continue to add things in the chat if you would like to. I will go back to it later today so that I can answer those questions. There's some additional handouts that I want to be able to share. And I think since I can access that chat, Carolyn, would you mind if it's okay if I drop those links in? Is that okay for anything
Sure,
that I
of
didn't get to
course.
send you initially? Okay,
Yeah,
perfect. Well,
definitely.
thank you guys so much for joining me today, and also just the little cameos from my children. I appreciate y'all's patience with that. Y'all have been wonderful, and I always appreciate getting to join you for these classes.
Thank you so much. This was really great information. Yes, it's definitely needed.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much. Y'all take care.
Thanks.